We're talking some 49ers with Sam Monson of Pro Football Focus, lead NFL analyst here in Indianapolis for the 2024 NFL Scouting Combine. And Sam, you think back to the Super Bowl, thrilling game, comes down to the wire between San Francisco and Kansas City, record audience, 123 million people watching as the peak of that broadcast. It goes into overtime, and it ends up being another crushing loss for San Francisco and Kyle Shanahan. And you think back to all the self-inflicted mistakes that San Francisco made in four quarters, as well as the overtime period, the Christian McCaffrey fumble, all of the penalties, the muffed punt, no points off the Isaiah Pacheco fumble, no points in Chiefs territory following that Patrick Mahomes interception, Purdy not seeing Aiyuk on that Trent McDuffie corner blitz, great draw up by Steve Spagnuolo there, and not blocking Chris Jones in overtime when Purdy potentially had Juwan Jennings in the flat, Aiyuk in the end zone. That Super Bowl, Niners-Chiefs, did San Francisco lose it? Did Kansas City win it? Your overall thoughts on that game?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's both, right? Kansas City made the plays when it mattered right at the end. Patrick Mahomes was Patrick Mahomes when it mattered most, and that's ultimately why they are on the way to being the next, dynastic team, the next Patriots with multiple Super Bowl rings already, and who knows how many they'll get to. It's because, generally speaking, in crunch time, that's when Mahomes makes those plays, and even if, the game hasn't gone great, or even if the Chiefs haven't been, this was not a vintage Kansas City Chiefs offense, certainly this year, they got it done when it mattered most, and the 49ers didn't. They had opportunities to win that game, and maybe they could have won it, or should have won it, rather, but they made the mistakes when it mattered most, and the Chiefs didn't. So I think ultimately it's both those things happening at the same time is what flips the game towards Kansas City.
I want to talk to you about Brock Purdy because here at the Combine, Niners personnel, Chiefs personnel, very complimentary of Purdy. And Spags even said it following the Super Bowl. He wanted to reach out to Purdy because he was so impressed with his play, how he carries himself. And he said in the lead up to the Super Bowl, this guy can be a game changer, not necessarily a game manager. And you look at some of Purdy's numbers from 2023. Passing touchdowns, 31, that ranked third in the NFL. Yards per attempt, number 1. Deep ball completion rate, number 1. Pressured completion percentage, number 4. Red zone completion percentage, he was really quick with his processing. I think that's a great skill. 70.5%, that was number 2. True passer rating, number 1. QBR, number 1. EPA, number 1. You look at a lot of these numbers as a part of Pro Football Focus. You look at the tape. Your thoughts on Brock Purdy? First full season as a starter, top 5 in MVP voting. Little bit limited from a stature, arm strength standpoint, but he can make plays improvisationally in my eyes. And are we talking about him as having a bazooka of an arm like a Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes? No, but he does some of the mature quarterbacking things really well with some of the processing, touch, and accuracy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, everyone wants to start looking for quarterbacks that have these incredible tools. Josh Allen is this quarterback built in a lab where he's huge, he's got an incredible arm, he's athletic, he can make jump over linebackers, he can run around DBs, all these kinds of things. Josh Allen is the perfect composite of tools for an NFL quarterback right now. But we know that that's not what makes an NFL quarterback. Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the NFL right now. Other guys throughout history have been the best quarterback in the NFL without a bunch of those tools. I mean, Joe Montana was this sort of small, slight quarterback who just happened to be able to turn it on Joe Cool when the game mattered most and make all those fourth quarter comebacks and all those wins. And if you gave him a chance with 2 minutes left on the clock, you were going to win the game. Brock Purdy doesn't need to be Josh Allen physically to be a great quarterback. And I think we saw that this season. Now, we also know, and this is where it gets complicated, that Kyle Shanahan's offense is a cheat code in today's NFL. Quarterbacks running a variant of that system. Shanahan's offense in San Francisco, McDaniel's version in Miami, and Bobby Slowick's offense in Houston, they ranked 1, 2, 3 in yards per attempt, right? We know that offense boosts the production of quarterbacks generally across the board. I mean, Nick Mullins has the same yards per attempt figure, I think, in his career as Aaron Rodgers, right?
Yeah.
It's a cheat code. And we also know that you start looking at the personnel that San Francisco have with, George Kittle and Deebo Samuel and Brandon Aiyuk and Christian McCaffrey. They might have the best composite of skill position players in the entire league as well, and we know that makes an impact as well. So there are all these things that we know have a piece of the credit pie that aren't Brock Purdy, right? He's doing some great things, but we also know Kyle Shanahan's offense deserves a piece of the credit, and all these skill position players deserve a piece of the credit. And the only way of doing that is to take some of the credit away from Brock Purdy. But in this all or nothing world of social media and, lack of nuance, the way everyone reports on it, it's like, well, that means he must be a bum. He must be a product of the system. He must just be a guy, and he's reaping the rewards of all these other guys, the Shanahan offense, the playmakers. The truth is they're all working together, which is why this is arguably the best offense in the NFL. Purdy is bringing things to the table that some of these other quarterbacks didn't. Like, there's a reason that offense looked better when he came in versus even Jimmy Garoppolo, who has been a good NFL quarterback in the past. It's certainly better than Nick Mullins or C.J. Beathard running that system, So Purdy has clear traits that enhance this offense. And I think where the sum of all of it is better than the individual parts is Purdy's best trait right now is the late in the down, improvisational stuff. The play breaks down. He can either make plays with his legs or he can find a way somewhere to go with the ball with his arm. And it's like when the Shanahan offense finally runs out of answers, when there isn't an open guy or the play design didn't scheme somebody open immediately and Purdy wasn't able to hit him, late in the down, that's when he takes over and adds a play that wouldn't have been there if it was Jimmy G or Nick Mullins or C.J. Beathard. So I think the sum of all those parts together is what makes this an amazing offense. And Purdy is a really, really good quarterback, but it's also fair to at least sort of, raise the question of, well, what happens if you take away those skill set players? Or what happens if you take away Shanahan's offense? What happens if you took him and put him, in a different offense, like with the Raiders? What would it look like? Like, that's a reasonable question to ask, but it doesn't matter for the moment because he's in this offense, and in this offense, he looks great.
Great analysis right there. That's why you're one of the best in the business. You talk about Shanahan's offense, and then you mention names like LaFleur and Bobby Slowick, who I thought did a terrific job in elevating the play of C.J. Stroud. Sean McVay as part of that tree as well. The fingerprints from that Shanahan offense are just littered across the entire NFL. The nuances of it, why is it such a difficult offense for opposing defenses to stop?
I think when you start diving into what those guys did that's different from other places or other schemes or other coaching trees, is they made an effort to learn the game, not just from their little silo of, offense or pass game. They tried to learn it from all different angles. And the Athletics, Jordan Rodriguez did a series called Play Callers, I think, on their
great podcast.
It was, and that was one of the things that you learned really up front in that series is all these guys spent time on the other side of the ball. They learned from the defensive side as well. Bobby Slowick used to work at PFF. He was a senior analyst years ago with us, and when he came to us, it was after he'd been an assistant linebackers coach in Washington before he got to San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan. He was a defensive side of the ball guy, right? He didn't want to comment necessarily on offensive questions that we had. He's like, I'm a defensive guy. I don't really know the game as well from the other side. I'm not sure what they're trying to do with this play, et cetera, et cetera. And it's that cross kind of pollination of all these different angles of the game, offense, defense, run game, pass game. You blend it all together. Now you have just a much more complete view of, number one, what you're trying to do. Number two, how a defense is going to combat that, what they're going to try and do, where the weaknesses are in any given defense you're looking at. And I think they just have a much more nuanced and complete understanding of the game and of the scheme than other systems out there where they're like, this is our offense, this is how it works, this is what we do, because eventually you're going to run up against a scheme or a defense that knows how to combat that, and now you need to understand, well, what's the solution to this? And it's something different.
Yeah. And we think of Kyle Shanahan, offensive guru, offensive genius, throw those terms out there. A lot of people don't realize, he has a great understanding of the defensive side of the ball, too, which then allows him to kind of see the game from that wide perspective. A couple more of Sam Monson, Pro Football Focus. Brandon Aiyuk, second highest graded wide receiver after Tyreek Hill, according to PFF's rankings. Second team All-Pro. You look at his numbers every year since he's come into the league in 2020, 25th overall pick in the draft that year, better and better and better from a receiving yard standpoint. I think he's one of the better route running technicians with just excellent footwork in the NFL. A lot of talk over the last couple of weeks that maybe San Francisco could trade him because from the Niners standpoint, you deal him away, you're paying all these players massive amounts of money, and you can get a first-round pick to draft maybe your future right tackle who's going to be a part of the organization for 10 years. Might be hard to pass up on, but you think about the Niners' history as an organization, they've really taken care of their homegrown players. George Kittle, highest paid tight end in NFL history back in 2020. Fred Warner, highest paid off-ball linebacker in the NFL. Deebo Samuel got top 10 wide receiver money. Nick Bosa last year, highest paid non-quarterback in the history of the NFL. When the 2024 season starts, is Brandon Aiyuk a 49er?
I think he will be, but I do think it's a question that should be getting asked, right? Like, even internally, if they're not at least exploring what that looks like, I don't think that that's doing, fair due diligence to the roster. Like, the 49ers, they have essentially the biggest cheat code in roster construction in today's NFL. They have one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL earning literally the least amount of money that's
Less than $1
possible
million
for a quarterback to earn.
Yeah.
Like, he's genuinely, it's literally not possible for a starting quarterback to be earning less money than Brock Purdy, because he was the last pick of the draft with that slotted contract. If he'd been an undrafted rookie, he'd be earning more money than he is right now. So until the next contract kicks in, until they're able to give him a new contract, they have the biggest boost of any team in the NFL in terms of how they can spend the rest of their salary cap. So they have, I think, 5 guys with a cap hit of $20+ million next year.
Yep.
And then another 5 or 6 that are over $10 million. And it's a case of, okay, we only have so many of these players that we can give a big deal to. And then, next year when Purdy's contract comes on the roster and that becomes a bigger one, now we've got to figure out, do we lose one of these $20 million guys? So they can definitely do it. They can definitely pay Brandon Aiyuk, make him one of those 5 or 6 guys, figure out maybe Trent Williams is the sacrifice in a year or two's time when Brock Purdy's contract becomes a much bigger number. They can definitely manage that. But if somebody is willing, there's a couple of teams picking in the teens. Jacksonville, I think, or 14, something like that. Indianapolis, 15, 16, somewhere. Those teams are in that kind of area. If one of those teams picks up the phone and says, hey, I've got pick 14, I've got pick 16 for you, for Brandon Aiyuk. We'll do the contract. We'll let you save that. You can use pick 15, pick 16 on another wide receiver. The Vikings did this with Stephon Diggs and Justin Jefferson. Now, it's unlikely to work as well as that did, because that was, a ridiculously low chance that you take a really high-level receiver, flip him for a pick even lower in the 20s somewhere, and then end up with a better receiver for less money. But it shows that it can work. And the 49ers did this a few years ago with Javon Kinlaw and DeForest Buckner, and that obviously didn't work as well, right?
No.
You got rid of Buckner, you avoided having to pay that big contract. You brought in Kinlaw, and he hasn't worked out as well. But so it's always going to be a risk. But the Eagles are another team with A.J. Brown. They flipped their first-round pick and a third, I think, as well, and they were willing to pick up the contract, and that was the best first-round pick that was spent that year.
For sure.
So it all comes down to what the trade looks like. And even then, the 49ers would absolutely be within their rights to say, this guy's too good, he's too efficient, he's too dangerous. The whole of all of these guys together is too good to let him, leave and to break it up. I say we make it happen and we figure out how to fit all the Jenga pieces together later on. But I do think it's a conversation that should be happening, and they should be listening to phone calls, even if they're ultimately deciding to keep him.
Last one for you. Niners need to address offensive line, in my opinion. It's gotten exposed over the last couple of years. It's a good year to need offensive line help. It's a loaded draft class on the interior, at the tackle position as well. A couple of guys who I like who can play on the perimeter at tackle or on the inside. San Francisco looking ahead, free agency draft. What areas do you think they hit?
Yeah, I think you're right. That offensive line all the way through last year looked like a weakness on paper. Now, they did a really good job of making it not be a weakness on the field.
Yeah.
And this is one of the elements of the Shanahan offense that I think generally doesn't get talked about enough. It protects offensive lines. Miami's offensive line looked terrible on paper, and they played pretty well. Houston's offensive line looked like a weakness on paper. They played pretty well. Like, this Shanahan system doesn't just help quarterbacks, doesn't just help skill position players, it helps offensive linemen as well. So it might not be as bad as it looks on paper. They might be able to get by consciously investing less in the offensive line than some other teams, but you don't feel good about that. You'd always like to improve that group and get it playing at a higher level and get it looking better on paper as well. And I agree with you. I think it's a good offseason to need offensive linemen. There's some players in free agency that would be intriguing. There's a lot of lower level guys, second or third tier type free agents. I'm really curious how the league views a guy like Michael Owenu from the Patriots. He's always graded exceptionally well for PFF. They've moved him about a bunch of different positions. I think his best position is right tackle, but he can absolutely play inside at guard. But the Patriots, for some reason, never really bought into him as a true, starting caliber elite player. If the rest of the league views that the same way, he could be a bargain. Like his price tag might be very cheap, and you could get a really high quality starting right tackle for peanuts. Alternatively, the rest of the league might just think the Patriots are dumb for not playing him like that, and his price tag might be a lot higher. But I'd be really intrigued for him as a free agent option. I think you're right. The draft, particularly where the 49ers are picking, I think there's going to be a good group of players. A guy like Troy Fontenot from Washington who could kick inside to guard, I think would make a lot of sense.
Yeah. PFF_Sam. You can give him a follow on X. Really appreciate you hopping on the show, talking some Niners here.
No problem. Thanks for having me.